Welcome back to Rebels of the Heart. Alex, this is really an honor on multiple levels. One, just because I consider you a friend and really admire your work in the world, but it's also the first episode of Rebels that we've done in quite some time. We've been on pause, as you know, and we're really excited to be bringing the show back to the market. A lot has changed since our last episode, and I can't think of a better person to welcome to Rebels of the Heart than you. So welcome, Dr. Alex Alonso, and I'll just ask you to share a bit about yourself and how you embody that rebel with a heart spirit before we jump into it.
You're too kind, Derek, and I really appreciate it. One of the things that I always appreciate is being, around you, affiliated with you, because I learn so much when I'm around you. And as SHRM's chief knowledge officer, it's important when you actually meet people that you learn something from, right? So
Yeah.
I'm ecstatic to be here on your show and or your podcast, I should say.
Yeah.
And more than that, I look forward to learning more and sharing more. So.
Yeah, absolutely. And the feeling is mutual. I definitely learn from you every time we interact. And I think the viewers and listeners are in for a treat today. And again, just for those who are on the show, I'm Derek Lundsten. I'm the CEO of Life Guides. We're a platform that's connecting people to navigate their life experiences, their events and challenges to help them thrive in and outside of the workplace. And I've been fortunate to be a part of this organization since its founding and this podcast since it launched several years ago. Right prior to the COVID pandemic, which what a time that happened. So here we are in a new installation, new installment of the show. And we're going to talk today a little bit with Alex, who has an amazing breadth of data and research at his background to talk about this topic, which is how the world of work has shifted over the last few years through AI, through the pandemic, through the world, how we've changed in our working habits and where we're going, and particularly how that impacts managers and manager readiness as part of that. That's going to be part of our conversation. But before we jump into that question, or the first question I have on that topic, Alex, I'm going to ask you, what does it mean to you to be a rebel with a heart? What is that? What comes to mind when you imagine that phrase?
The first thing that comes to mind when I think about that, because I'm always a rebel without a cause, right? I think
Yeah,
James Dean right off the bat. So I'm dating myself, even though I'm too young
yeah,
to have seen him alive, right? But one of the things that strikes me is when you're doing something that is 100% upstart and not always falling in line with what is accepted norms. And when you do it with a heart, it's doing so in a way that actually gets people to connect with some sort of story, some sort of cause, or more importantly, some sort of change they need, right? And so as I think about this, my mission at SHRM has always been to help HR leaders and HR professionals do things differently, but get them to connect with what they should be doing, right? Not just think about how they're approaching the world, but getting them to think about things differently. And then at the same time, getting them to say, okay, you know what? If I do it this way, if I think about this problem this way, there is a chance that I could touch this many lives or make this much of a difference with this many people, right? So much so that I even wrote a book about it. My last book was Unsung Heroes, and it was
nice.
about exactly that. I should have called it Rebels with a Cause, right? Or I'm sorry, Rebels with a Heart. In large
Either
part,
works.
in large part because it is. When I think about people in this space, Derek, you're amongst those people who are doing that. So, no,
Well,
I don't mean to make it a mutual admiration society here, but it's the truth.
well, that's fun. I appreciate that very much. And I'll just say, you're in a rare position from my point of view,
Mhm.
in the sense that in your role as the chief knowledge officer of SHRM, you, like I said in the intro, you have access to a data set that is unparalleled in the industry. I mean, you really understand what's happening in in the culture of the workplace, in the culture of society, based on the surveys and information that you all are collecting about what's happening in and outside of the workplace. And I think back to the initiative that you led a couple of years ago around civility, right? And what that
Mhm.
meant and how that and what that was informed by. I would imagine that you have insight into what's happening now and what's happening, going to happen in the next 6 months to a year. And I'm going to preface it by saying what's really happening right now in our workplace. What's the underlying story, to your point, that's happening that's not being told at the moment that you want our listeners and viewers to hear right now based on your unique position of what's really happening beneath the surface and where are we headed right now?
Yeah, so I'm an organizational psychologist by training, and my training in that started as a skip tracer, which is not the way most psychologists get their start, right? For those of you that don't know, skip tracer is kind of like Dog the Bounty Hunter. I got to do that for about a year, and you learn more about people that way than any other way in the world, right? What um, what I know to be true about the world today and specifically the world of work, right? It centers around three core things, right? Worker expectations are shifting faster than we've ever seen. It's not, I expect there to be something that is the top thing that I need and hope that that stays there for the next 5 to 10 years, stays the same for the next 5 years, what have you, right? Perfect example of this is we do a state of the workplace study within SHRM. We access close to 33,000 working Americans plus HR leaders from 15,000 organizations to really track what it is that they see are things that are changing in the world of work and what they predict will be the biggest thing happening in the world of work, right? And when I think about what it is that we're seeing, it's really threefold. The first is that expectations are shifting, and that workers by generation are actually losing their connection to things that we expected them to have over the course of time, right? And so everybody wants pay, right? There's no question about that. But what's fascinating is more often than not, when you ask people what it is that engages them at work, you get most managers telling you it's meaningful purpose, right? Or purpose and meaning in the work that I do, those kinds of things. The other things are just clear kind of table stakes when it comes to engagement, but in reality, purpose and meaning are the things that most people will report out. Gallup will have you believe that, for almost 3 decades, that's been a key factor, right? A key facet. The funny thing is, when you look at the data today, what we see is purpose and meaning actually don't even factor in the top five anymore.
Really?
They don't even factor in the top five. And what I find particularly interesting about that is you're seeing basically that there are people who are looking for, I will define my own purpose and meaning. Don't worry about that. What I need is the table stakes and the flexibility to go make my own purpose and meaning, right? And things that used to be less important are by far much more important. Years ago, right, during COVID, we saw that wellness skyrocketed to number two. And if I had put my money on wellness to stay in the number two spot for 5 years, I would have been a very rich person. In fact, wellness continues to be very high. It's the number three thing that people are looking for. And it actually isn't that purpose and that meaning. That purpose and that meaning still registers, but it's number 8 out of 11 core things, as opposed to what is the basics of what used to be number one and number two. I want security, safety, job. And then the other thing is I want some sort of purpose or meaning in that job. And those things just don't hold true anymore. And as we see people become more nuanced in the world of personalization and the world of identity, people are actually willing to let that shift from period to period, as opposed to having core kind of things that they need just as baseline no matter what.
Incredible. So out of curiosity, what are you seeing right now is number one and number two, Alex, particularly, in the lens of wellness be number three?
So wellness is number three. Number two is advancement and learning, and then number one is still pay, but it's pay with the notion of job security. I want to be able to still have a job or a gig that keeps me engaged in what I need to be doing. So
Fascinating. And so as you look at, let's zero in on the number two here, which is advancement and learning.
yeah.
And then back to my comment earlier, what are you seeing specifically being requested in this respect? And I obviously AI is, you and I have talked about this at length at a number of different conferences that we've both mutually attended and SHRM has hosted. With the advent of AI, artificial intelligence, and other factors, what is contributing right now to this request for advancement and learning, and what specifically is being requested in this sense of advancement and learning that was not necessarily being identified as a core need 3 or 5 years ago?
Yeah. So without question, the biggest driver behind what people are looking for when it comes to advancement and development is actually AI, right? There's no question about that. It is both the automation that is happening in workplaces, especially in the manufacturing industry, especially in the tech sector, where you're starting to see vibe coding really make a real difference in the type of employment that and programmers can have.
Yeah.
But the other thing that I think we're seeing is we're seeing that narrative that everybody's afraid of being displaced sort of being nuanced. I don't want to say it's being bucked, but it's being nuanced, right? If you look at our labor economic data, we predicted by the year 2030, there are going to be at least 22 million jobs that are likely of the highest likelihood to be displaceable, right? Meaning that at least 50% of what the work is in those roles is something that can be automated or done by AI. That's between now and 2030, right? But in reality, what we find is that as you look at what it is that the press will tell you, right? People are running scared. That's that's 15% of the total workforce in the U.S. alone, as we see it. But in reality, what you're seeing is there are 68% of workers who say they want to learn AI, even if it means that they are likely to be displaced, right? Show me how to do prompting. Number one is the very first thing that they want to know. Show me how to do prompting. Number two, teach me how to become a machine learner. In other words, somebody who can teach LLMs what it is that they need to do. And then the third thing is, okay, so LLMs are one type of AI. Show me the future beyond that, right? And in my space, that's particularly critical because if you look at data and you look at the world of analytics and things like that, we're now moving into a space where you're starting to hear about LTMs, right? And those are large table models, right? And tabular models. And they're designed to ingest data that is of a numeric nature and turn it into analytics and turn it into pure analysis, right? My field is about to go through a revolution, largely displaceable, but still has is at the forefront of what's causing that.
Fascinating. So what are you on that same note, like back to the state of optimism, which you and I share,
Mhm.
what are you starting to see indicators are going to be careers or jobs of the future that are coming forward as a result of this displacement? Because we have talked before, just because the job of yesterday is no longer there, obviously we're upgrading, we're evolving our capabilities, and new jobs and new employment opportunities will be created. What are some of the things that you're seeing in that respect? And then I'm going to come back to the role of managers in that transition.
Yeah, so it's fascinating because what we see with that is there are a whole new host of cottage industries, right? Or cottage roles that are popping up. For instance, AI attorney and AI law is exploding, right? Just like space law was exploding the last 5 to 10 years, now you're starting to see AI kind of growing. And you wouldn't think of it as something that's growing because when you think about contract law, that's certainly taking a hit when it comes to AI and displaceability. But how you manage factors like intellectual property, how you manage factors like ownership, patents, things like that are all new things that are coming along the line in terms of AI law. And there are a couple of precedents that are likely to make a real dent in how we think about AI moving forward. So much so that, believe it or not, AI is actually going to be able to engage lawyers for their own services, which is sort of funny,
Mhm.
especially when we hit the point where AI becomes artificial general intelligence.
Yeah.
And that actually people think is a technology issue. It's actually not a technology issue. It's more of a legal issue because what you find is the day that AI is considered a being in a court of law, that needs to then go to the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court can either choose to uphold it or reject it. And then at the same time, the minute that that happens, let's say that they uphold it, what you end up finding is AI now becomes a being just like humans. So that means we can hold trademarks, patents, those kinds of things, copyright, all those things. So that's one example of a cottage industry that's about to explode because of the birth of AI. The other thing that actually stands out though is you get a lot of machine learners that are actually happening, but they're called contextual machine learners, right? And what you're seeing is there's a whole host of older workers and aging workers, people who have retired even, that are coming back to the workforce with the aim of taking advantage of their knowledge, their context, everything that they've learned about the way the world works, including the way that they communicate, so that we can train a variety of different automations, as well as machine learning tools, as well as natural language processing tools, as well as generative AI. So that's another example that we're seeing that happen. And believe it or not, this was a case where the National Institute of Health, the Institutes of Health, are actually on the front end of that in particular by bringing back people who are able to really help them get forward in the world of AI and think deeply about the knowledge that was created. The other example that strikes me is jobs that are coming back as a result of the AI boom. So in other words, not really AI jobs, not the AI ethicist as I've heard, or the AI experiencist, which are sort of the weird kind of things that are new in the marketing space or in the legal space. But things like electrical engineer, believe it or not, electrical engineer is on a boom after having pretty much been stable or flat as an occupation for the last 30 years. And the reason for that is because of the energy problem that exists with AI and what happens when you're running quantum computing, when you're running the precursor to quantum computing and all those things, right? And so the energy expended is something that actually is creating a variety of different other former cottage industries kind of pop
Yeah.
up. What is fascinating about that too, though, is who it is that is actually hiring them, because it is a signal to the world that the utilities, in particular, the government subsidized utilities, as a way of thinking about it, are
Yeah.
about to be disrupted significantly because Google has now become the largest employer of electrical engineers and environmental engineers in the US alone. And what they're doing is they're trying to solve that energy problem with the aim of then becoming a utility themselves.
Yeah. I mean, that's a massive transformation of how companies are showing up and what the value they're bringing in this respect. So I want to take a step back for just a moment and talk about the role of managers in managing change beyond just managing skills and attributes of roles. Like, how are you seeing organizations equip? Because I've talked about this before. The role of a middle manager or senior level manager of influencing and leading their people through this change. How are you seeing companies that really equip managers to do that effectively, recognizing that things are just getting faster and faster, and the ability to adapt themselves and then communicate that adaptation to their team members and their employees, especially across all different functions, from hiring to learning and development to skills management and production and performance management to conflict management to all these different areas that managers are responsible. How are you seeing companies address that gap and that shift that's taking place so quickly?
So it's funny you bring this up because I think a big portion of what we're seeing managers do is have to evolve to becoming a life guide, pardon the pun, right? Uh, and I say that in large part because what we're seeing managers have to do is take a step beyond what is the organizational objective, and then thinking specifically about what it is that you can do in the service of that organizational objective, but also in service of that employee or that team member who will likely or could potentially be offloaded at some point because of AI, right?
Yeah.
And so what you see is a significant increase in the number of managers who are looking for an understanding about empathy, an understanding about what it is that they can do to help their workforce develop in a scalable way around AI. And more importantly, how they themselves can evaluate what it is that someone's doing when thinking about AI and the work product that's being put out on, in terms of AI. I say this in large part because more often than not, when people think about empathy, right, they think about this notion of meapathy, and you've heard Johnny talk
Yeah.
about this.
Yes.
Yeah, and really, what ends up happening with most managers is they're actually trying to be empathetic, but in service of their own objectives, as opposed to in service of the individual's objectives or a broader objective. And a prime example of this is I'm going to go ahead and help you, but only because it absolves me of any kind of wrongdoing or any kind of pain that I'm feeling, discomfort that I'm feeling because of the way you were impacted in some way, shape, or form. We're starting to see people divorce themselves from that and actually get deeper into empathy. And the three biggest signals that I see related to that when it comes to managers and the training that HR professionals are offering managers these days is really this notion of training people how to communicate in a way that indicates that you understand their career objectives, you understand how to help them out of a particular mistake or error, and that you understand something about their life objectives, meaning not just the career objectives that happen within the organization, not just their long-term career objectives, but in life, what is it that you want to accomplish? Tell me something about your life. Tell me how it is that you achieve that. It sounds utterly simple, but believe it or not, those kind of conversations are not easy,
Yeah.
and you know that better than anybody. And what we find is that HR professionals are steering so much of their training and development into that space. Also added into that mix now is teach me all these technical skills that I need to build related to AI. And if I
Yeah.
can't do that, there's also the third layer, the third rail, as they say, which is teach me how to get those first level skills that I'm not going to be able to get if I'm entering the workforce.
So are you at SHRM, or are you seeing anyone in the industry who's building this kind of rubric, for lack of a better term, or continuum of proficiency or mastery in this cross-functional skill set? So the human, what was historically considered soft skills, i.e. empathy and communication and the elements therein, with the new advancement of technological, gifting and skills that are available through AI. Are you building that? Or are you seeing that come to the market right now, where companies are able to start to gauge readiness, proficiency, mastery in a hybrid model of kind of bringing those two different intelligence together?
So we are building something like that. In fact, we're in the middle of building platform that allows us to look specifically at that from an HR professional's perspective.
Okay.
Right? So keep in mind, our remit is typically in the HR space. We call it HRX. And one of the things that we're looking at is how HR is delivering all three of those kind of outcomes as a function. With then the second layer being that we also are targeting leadership development and ensuring that leaders are doing that from cradle to or backpack to boardroom, as we like to say around here, right? And so you'll see that there are two kind of elements that are happening out there that are really driving it differently, right? One is getting the HR function to see the impact of this. The other is getting the leaders themselves to see the value of this, right? At SHRM, that's HRX. And then the second phase of it is SHRM linkage solutions, right? SHRM
Yeah.
linkage that is targeting that.
And what are you seeing in terms of companies that are putting best practices in this respect to develop this, like to move from this one intelligence to the next? Like, what are some of the L&D pathways that you're seeing put into place to address
Yeah,
this?
it's sort of funny because what you're talking about is HI plus AI plus
Hey,
a little bit of EI, right? Or EQ, as we used to say, and how you turn that into kind of a future ready worker. The companies that are doing that best are still some of the ones that we've seen over the course of the last 15 years. The one that does it best in my book, if you were to put me down for this, is PepsiCo. PepsiCo does this better than anyone, and I say this in large part because they were way ahead of the curve in terms of trying to understand the EI or the EQ plus the AI. Right? They were very clean. A lot of people talk about pharmaceuticals and AI, right?
yeah,
What it allows us to do, but chemistry is chemistry, right? That just happens to be organic chemistry. When you talk about things like soft drinks, when you talk about beverages, delights, those kinds of things, believe it or not, AI applies the same way there.
yeah,
And so they've been really ahead of the curve when it comes to building those types of solutions and that kind of process. In fact, Indra Nuir, who was their CEO years ago,
yeah.
was keen on this in particular. The other group that stands out to me, though, that nobody talks about is Novartis. And Novartis in particular is built themselves on a learning culture where the three things that any HR professional needs to be able to list off right off the bat is tell me how you are delivering something on AI development.
Yeah.
Tell me how you're delivering something on people development, meaning managers actually being able to practice empathy. And then third, tell me how it is that you're building this future readiness. So everything that they have kind of built out in their space is really built upon this kind of model. And then the
Well,
last, go ahead. I'm sorry.
well, continue. Please continue. Finish your
Yeah,
thought. Finish your thought.
the last group that actually stands out to me is one that is sort of driving this mentality forward is a group that I think a lot of people wouldn't think would be driving this forward, but it's Oracle. And I say this in large part. The reason I say they wouldn't be driving it is because they themselves stand to benefit from as much AI innovation as any other group, any of the big organizations out there. But Oracle, in and of itself, has actually defined an entire organizational capability model down to individuals, and they are delivering what it is that can be done to develop people in a way that is making this middle era, as I like to call it, this middle era of humans and AI having to work together,
Yeah.
one where people are really effective. There's a lady out at in Framingham at their Oracle offices. Her name is Rachel Graham, and she is a stellar strategist. She could talk to you about this nonstop about all the work that they're doing in this space.
Fascinating. Well, I'm going to say a couple of things, and I'm glad you brought that last example up. So one, in my last venture, I had the privilege to work very closely with Novartis, and as you recall, it was a
Yeah.
learning technology company. So I can attest to their culture of learning and development and to all the effort that they're putting in. So it's cool to hear you say they're continuing down this path, particularly in the age of AI, and not surprisingly. It's interesting about the Oracle example is because you specifically brought the idea down to individuals, what I believe is when you think about AI, the role of personalization and how we can really get into the root of the unique gaps and needs that people have, and to roll that up to their teams and to roll it up to their departments and those different areas. Like our ability to do that in a bespoke way for companies was what we aspired to do 10, 15 years ago in learning it was just an ideal at the time. Now we can actually do that in terms of providing personalized learning in a way using these tools. So that's fascinating. And I want to come back to something that you said, just about, SHRM building products or building for the HR profession specifically. And I know that is true, but I also know that, HR fundamentally is about people and and humans, people, right? And developing people broadly. I think you're building something or you have resources that really transcend what is historically considered HR into just developing people, developing teams, developing the workplace. I think that's really what I imagine, and just hearing you talk about from backpack to boardroom, that's where you're moving. It sounds like, and transforming what Sherm's intention really is to expand, to think of HR much more broadly than what has been considered in the past. Would you maybe talk to that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, so look, the truth of the matter is in the US alone, there are 2.1 million HR professionals, right? And at the end of the day, our foundation has always been focused on serving those HR professionals, but to what end, right? I think about my good friend Dave Ulrich,
Yeah,
and
love Dave.
and Dave is one to tell you, and so what, right? His next question is always, and so what? For what purpose are you doing this, right? And the truth of the matter is, every business is doing things for two purposes, right? Number one is to generate a customer. You have to generate a customer. That's what business is based on. The second thing is to ensure that you are improving lives across organizations, across your stakeholder community, across the communities you work through, your shareholders, so on, right? And so at the end of the day, every bit of it starts for us with HR, but that doesn't mean we stop at HR. For each one of those 2.2 million or 2.1 million and 6.7 million worldwide, there are roughly 200 million people managers that need support, that need service across the planet. And that's 200 million people managers who are people who can actually have an impact day to day on the lives of humans in every capacity, in every setting, right? I think of this and I come back to one thing that we did as research. I want to say back in 2018. Forgive me. I'm gonna try to quote it, but it's research that I did with my good colleague Nick Schacht, who is the chief
Yeah.
commercial officer for SHRM, right? And the research was when you look at the variance, right, the variability in how employees rate their HR functions as effective or ineffective, right? 52% of that variance is in the performance or based upon the performance of the HR function itself. 43% of it is based upon the people manager's performance,
Uh-huh.
right? So whether you like it or not, people managers and HR, we're tied at the hip like this, right? We cannot do anything. We cannot affect change for any human without each other. So when I talk about that, I view my world at SHRM as being both someone who impacts the lives of HR professionals, but the and so what is to then impact the lives of those people managers, make them more effective. And then the and so what is so that I can take these millions and millions and millions of workers, billions in some cases, and give them the opportunity to achieve things that they couldn't have because they're in better workplaces, which make for their better world.
Well said. I'm going to close with one last question, which kind of comes back full circle to where you started. What is it? And I completely agree on the role of those interwoven roles. Why is it that wellness and well-being have persisted as being a top three topic in this world, in this evolution, in your view? Like what has led that? What is driving that? Yeah, I'll just pause. Well, leading the witness. What is driving?
What's driving it is actually two things, right? Number one, people are more aware of what wellness means to them. And especially when you're thinking about it in relation to not just yourself, but your family, your extended loved ones, what have you, right? The other thing is, I think employers have actually done a really good job of making it clear that we need you to be healthy. If you are not well, you coming into the workplace is almost negative. It's a bad impact. Now, that's on one side of the coin. On the other side of the coin, I think it's also a function of whether we like it or not, we're all experiencing a little bit of a post-COVID, not yet fully reset. And you know where I'm going with that,
Yeah.
right? But then the other thing that I think we're sort of seeing is we all still have struggles trying to achieve wellness, right? And it's just more salient to us than ever before that wellness is out there and that we haven't achieved it, right? And so to me, I think there's a salience issue, but then the second issue is that we're also being reminded of how important it is to help us achieve goals, help achieve objectives, and those kinds of things.
Well, I'll just close it by saying you have research that supports this, but one of the biggest contributors to someone's wellness at work is the relationship they have with their manager, right? So it brings it back full circle again to say, are developing healthy and well-skilled managers actually has a direct impact on the health and wellness and production of the teams and the companies that we lead. And so they are inextricably linked. And I think that's a really important distinction to make as well. Alice, we could talk about this for an hour, but I want to be sensitive to the listeners and viewers' time as they're probably on a commute here. And I just want to say thanks for coming back, coming on to Rebels with a Heart. Welcome back to the series and to kick it off and leading this episode with us. And really grateful for you and your partnership between Life Guides and SHRM, and excited for the work we're going to continue to do together and all that you're doing in leading the world of work and making better workplaces and a better world. So thank you.
Thank you, Derek, for having me.